The Veltharian Empire controlled space warfare for 3,000 years, and they were proud of it. Their ships looked like floating crystals, beautiful and deadly at the same time. These weren't just warships, they were works of art that happened to carry weapons. When they fought, it looked like a cosmic ballet, with plasma beams dancing between energy shields in patterns that had been perfected over centuries. Admiral Zexthul stood on the command bridge of his flagship, watching his fleet surround the Corvan colonies. 200 ships formed perfect geometric patterns around the rebel worlds, each vessel knowing exactly where to be. The Admiral's 4 eyes gleamed with satisfaction. This would be another clean victory for the Empire, just like all the others. The Corvans had been foolish to rebel. Everyone knew how these things went. The Empire would bombard their defenses for exactly 47 days, following ancient protocols. Then they would offer surrender terms. The rebels would hold out for another week, maybe 2, before accepting. Some would die, but not too many. Just enough to make the point. War was civilized in the galaxy. Every species understood the rules. The Andromedans fought with their sleek silver ships, always maintaining proper distance. The Centauri used their energy webs, but never more than necessary. Even the brutal Korgath followed the ancient codes. They might roar and posture, but they knew when to stop. Wars were like chess games that lasted decades, with moves and counter-moves that everyone recognized. The galaxy had learned to make war beautiful. Battles were fought in specific zones away from civilian populations. Weapons were designed to disable rather than destroy completely. There were rules about targeting, rules about retreat, rules about everything. Military academies across dozens of worlds taught the same basic principles: honor, precision, and restraint. Admiral Zexthul had graduated from the finest academy, on Velthara Prime. He understood every formation, every tactic, every proper response to every situation. His career spanned 2 centuries of perfect victories. The Empire had never lost a war because they never took unnecessary risks. They were patient, methodical, and always followed the established ways. But something was different this time. Deep space sensors had been picking up strange readings for weeks now. Ships that moved too fast, energy signatures that made no sense, and radio chatter in an unknown language. The Emperor's Science Council dismissed it as sensor ghosts, or maybe some new Corvan trick. The Admiral wasn't so sure. Something felt wrong about this rebellion. The Corvans were holding out longer than expected, and they seemed strangely confident. For a doomed cause. They kept sending messages about protection coming and new allies, but that was impossible. Every spacefaring species in the galaxy was catalogued, and none would dare challenge the Veltharian Empire. Captain Jamin Kim was about to prove them all wrong. The human battleship Vengeance was already moving through hyperspace toward the Psi Corvan system, and with it came ideas about warfare that would terrify every military mind in the galaxy. Humans didn't fight like gentlemen. They fought to win. The alarm klaxons shattered the peaceful atmosphere on the Veltharian flagship. Red warning lights bathed the crystalline bridge as every sensor array went haywire at once. Scanner Prime. Nexaval's tentacles danced frantically over his control panels, his normally calm demeanor replaced by visible panic. "Admiral, we have an incoming vessel at impossible velocity," he reported, his voice cracking slightly. "The readings, they don't make sense. This ship is moving faster than our theoretical maximum, and it's not using any propulsion system we recognize." Admiral Zexthul moved to the main tactical display, his 4 eyes narrowing as he studied the approaching signature. What he saw defied everything he had learned in 2 centuries of military service. The vessel's design was completely alien, not alien in the sense of being from another species, but alien in that it seemed to reject every principle of good ship design. Where Veltharian ships were smooth and elegant, this thing was angular and harsh. It looked like someone had taken a mountain and stuck engines on it. Weapon ports covered every surface, not the carefully placed, aesthetically pleasing armaments of civilized warfare, but crude, brutal gun barrels that seemed designed for one purpose only: maximum destruction. "The hull composition is baffling," Nexaval continued, his scanner readings getting more confused by the second. "It appears to be made of primitive metals, iron, steel, titanium, materials we stopped using thousands of years ago. But somehow, these primitive materials are showing strength readings beyond our best crystalline composites. It's impossible. The ship's markings were equally puzzling. Instead of the flowing, artistic scripts used by all known species, this vessel bore crude angular letters that looked like they had been painted on with basic tools. There was no elegance, no beauty, just stark utilitarian markings that said nothing about art or culture. Admiral Zexthul tried to make contact using standard diplomatic protocols. The Veltharian communication array sent greetings in 17 different languages, along with mathematical proofs and universal peace symbols. The response was silence, not even acknowledgement that the messages had been received. Perhaps their communication systems are primitive, suggested Communications Officer Kelvar. Many young species struggle with complex frequency modulation. But the Admiral wasn't convinced. Something about this ship's approach pattern suggested intelligence. Not primitive intelligence, but a different kind of thinking entirely. The vessel wasn't following any recognizable flight path. It wasn't announcing itself or requesting permission to enter the system. It was simply coming, direct and purposeful, like a predator that had spotted prey. Prepare standard intercept. Formation, the Admiral ordered. Deploy squadrons 7 through 12 in a greeting pattern. We'll catalogue this new species and add them to the Galactic database. His officers moved to comply, but privately, many felt uneasy. Standard procedure called for unknown vessels to be 3 to 4 times smaller than Veltharian ships, manageable threats that could be easily contained. This monstrosity was 3 times larger than their biggest dreadnought, a ship so massive it created its own gravitational field. The Vengeance continued its approach, and Captain Jae-min Kim studied the alien fleet formation with interest. These weren't warriors, they were artists playing at war. That was about to change. The Vengeance exploded out of hyperspace like a cannonball fired from the gods themselves. The massive human battleship's arrival created a gravitational shockwave that no one in the galaxy had ever experienced before. Veltharian ships, despite their advanced stabilization systems, were caught completely off guard. The elegant crystalline vessels that had maintained perfect formation for hours suddenly found themselves spinning like leaves in a hurricane. Smaller, ships tumbled end over end, their crews desperately trying to regain control. Even the flagship lurched violently, throwing Admiral Zexthul against his command chair. "What in the void was that?" the Admiral gasped, his 4 eyes wide with shock. In 3,000 years of spacefaring, no ship had ever announced its arrival with such raw, brutal force. Captain Jae-min Kim stood calmly on the bridge of the Vengeance, watching the chaos through the main view screen. His expression was stone-cold serious as he activated the communication array. When he spoke, his voice carried across every frequency the Veltharians were monitoring, not a request for permission to broadcast, but a simple transmission that cut through their systems like a hot knife through butter. "This is the Earth vessel Vengeance," he announced in a tone that suggested he was used to being obeyed. "These colonies are under human protection. You have 30 seconds to withdraw." The message was so simple, so direct, that it left the Veltharian bridge crew speechless. Where was the traditional greeting? Where were the long introductions explaining who they were, where they came from, and what their intentions might be? Where were the gifts, the ceremonial exchanges, the careful negotiations about meeting locations? Admiral Zexthul recovered first, his training kicking in despite his confusion. "Unknown vessel," he began, using the formal diplomatic protocols that had worked for centuries. "State your species' rank in the galactic hierarchy and identify your territorial claims so that we may begin proper negotiations according to established—" "Irrelevant," came the reply, cutting him off mid-sentence. The word hit the Veltharian bridge like a physical blow. Irrelevant? How could galactic law be irrelevant? How could proper diplomatic procedure be irrelevant? The entire structure of civilized space was built on these protocols. Lieutenant So-Young Park, seated at the weapons control station, began counting down from 30 in a clear, steady voice that carried over the open channel. 29, 28, 27. The Veltharian crew looked at each other in bewilderment. This couldn't be happening. No species in galactic history had ever issued ultimatums during first contact. There were procedures to follow, forms to fill out, committees to consult. "Surely they don't mean to actually attack," whispered Communications Officer Kelvar. "They must be posturing. This is some kind of cultural misunderstanding." But Captain Jamin Kim's face on the view screen told a different story. This wasn't posturing or cultural confusion. This was a man who had said exactly what he meant and was prepared to back up his words with action. 15, 14, 13, Lieutenant Park continued, her countdown as steady as a heartbeat. Admiral Zexthul frantically tried to establish proper communication channels, but the humans weren't interested in talking. They had made their position clear given their warning, and now they were simply waiting to see if the Veltharians were smart enough to leave. 3, 2, 1, 0. Everything changed. The moment the countdown hit 0, the Vengeance transformed from a silent threat into a roaring monster of destruction. What happened next would be talked about in military academies across the galaxy for generations to come, not as a battle, but as a lesson in the difference between fighting and killing. The railguns opened fire first. These weren't the elegant plasma beams that Veltharian ships used in their choreographed battles. These were crude, primitive weapons that hurled chunks of tungsten metal at speeds that approached the speed of light itself. The projectiles were so fast that they didn't just hit their targets. They punched through them like bullets through paper, creating explosions of superheated metal and vaporized hull plating. 3 Veltharian cruisers, beautiful ships that had taken decades to construct and centuries to perfect, simply vanished. One moment they were there, graceful and deadly in their crystalline glory. The next moment they were expanding clouds of glowing debris, their crews never even having time to realize they were under attack. But the railguns were just the beginning. Fusion missiles streaked out from the Vengeance like angry stars, each one carrying the destructive power of a small sun. When they detonated, they didn't create the clean, precise explosions that civilized warfare demanded. Instead, they unleashed raw nuclear fire that consumed everything within kilometers, turning advanced starships into basic atoms in the blink of an eye. Admiral Zexthul watched his perfect formation dissolve into chaos and death, his 4 eyes unable to process what he was seeing. "By the void," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the screaming alarms that filled his bridge. "What are they doing? This wasn't how wars were supposed to work. Where was the careful maneuvering? Where were the warning shots? Where was the opportunity for surrender?" The humans had gone from negotiation to total destruction in exactly 30 seconds, with no middle ground between peace and annihilation. The Vengeance moved through the battlefield like a predator that had found a flock of helpless prey. Veltharian weapons, designed to disable engines or knock out shield generators, struck the human ship again and again. By all rights, the massive vessel should have been crippled. Its hull was scarred and blackened, sections were venting atmosphere, and at least 3 major weapon systems appeared to be offline, but it kept fighting. It kept killing. Commander Tae-Ho Lee stood at the weapons control station, his hands dancing over controls that coordinated more firepower than most species had ever imagined possible. His voice was calm and professional as he directed the slaughter. "Target the command ships first. Make them understand." There was no anger in his tone, no bloodlust or excitement. He spoke like a man doing a difficult but necessary job, someone who took no pleasure in killing, but understood that it had to be done completely and efficiently. "Focus fire on the flagship," he continued, highlighting Admiral Zexthul's vessel. "On the tactical display. Once their command structure collapses, the rest will surrender or scatter." This wasn't warfare as the galaxy understood it. This was extermination carried out with industrial efficiency and mechanical precision. The humans didn't fight to win territory or gain political advantage. They fought to end the fight as quickly and decisively as possible. The surviving Veltharian ships desperately tried to regroup, falling back on 3,000 years of proven military tactics. Admiral Zexthul ordered his fleet into the classic Spiral of Atheron formation, a defensive pattern that had never failed against any enemy in galactic history. His remaining ships moved with practiced precision, creating overlapping fields of fire, that should have trapped any opponent in a web of plasma beams. The humans had apparently never read the manual. The Vengeance responded to the elegant formation by doing something that made every Veltharian officer question their understanding of physics. Instead of trying to break through the defensive pattern or outmaneuver it, the massive human battleship simply fired all of its weapons at once, not at the enemy ships, but straight down. The recoil from dozens of railguns and missile launchers sent the Vengeance flying upward at impossible speed, completely bypassing the carefully constructed trap. The ship used its own weapons as engines, treating the laws of physics like suggestions rather than absolute rules. "That's impossible," Communications Officer Kelvar shouted. "The structural stress should have ripped their ship apart." But the humans weren't done breaking the rules. As Veltharian ships tried to pursue, the Vengeance performed a maneuver that no sane pilot would ever attempt. It dove straight toward the system's largest planet, using the gravity not as an obstacle to avoid, but as a slingshot to accelerate beyond anything the Veltharians had ever seen. Scanner Prime Nexvol's tentacles were practically tied in knots as he tried to track the human ship's movement. "They're using their own engine emissions as defensive screens," he reported in horror. "The radiation from their propulsion system is so intense that our targeting computers can't lock on." What the Veltharians didn't understand was that human ships weren't built for elegance or efficiency. They were built by a species that had learned to fight in the most hostile environment imaginable, the vacuum of space around a planet where everything was trying to kill them. Human engineering prioritized function over form, reliability over beauty, and raw power over sophisticated systems. Captain Jamin Kim stood on his bridge, watching the tactical display with calm determination. Around him, his crew worked with a coordination that came not from years of drill and ceremony, but from absolute necessity. Every human on that ship understood that they were outnumbered 200 to 1, facing an enemy with superior technology and thousands of years of experience. They fought anyway. Lieutenant So Young Park managed the weapons systems while simultaneously calculating trajectory adjustments. Engineering Chief Dongwoo Han kept the ship running, despite damage that should have been catastrophic. Navigator Min Seo Yoon plotted courses that turned the system's asteroids and moons into weapons, using gravity and momentum as tools of war. They fought like their species' survival depended on it, because in their minds it did. Humans had learned long ago that in the vast darkness of space, there was no such thing as a fair fight. There was only winning and dying. Admiral Zexthul watched his millennia-old strategies crumble like sandcastles before a tsunami. Every move he made, the humans countered with something completely unexpected. Every formation he tried, they ignored or turned against him. These creatures didn't just fight differently, they thought differently. The Veltharian intelligence officer, Velthan, had been monitoring human communications since the battle began, trying to understand these strange newcomers. What he discovered in those intercepted transmissions would haunt him for the rest of his life. The humans weren't just different. They were terrifying in ways that went far beyond their weapons. Every galactic species approached warfare with some sense of honor, ritual, or limitation. The proud Andromedans fought to prove their superiority. The methodical Centauri sought territorial advantage. Even the brutal Korgath had codes about when to stop fighting. But the humans? They fought like creatures backed into a corner with "Nowhere to run, Admiral," Velthan reported, his voice shaking as he played back the human communications. "They have no concept of acceptable losses." "Listen to this." The bridge speakers crackled with Captain Jamin Kim's voice from the Vengeance. "All stations, this is the captain. We are outnumbered and outgunned, but that doesn't matter. These colonists are counting on us, and we will not let them down. Fight like your families depend on it, because they do." There was no discussion of casualties they could afford to take, no calculation of how much damage was acceptable before retreating. The humans were prepared to die to the last person rather than abandon their mission. Officer Velthan switched to another recording, this one from the Human Weapons Control Station. Chief Gunner Min Ho Park's voice was steady and professional as he coordinated the devastating attacks. "Target their engines first. Disable their ability to retreat. No survivors if they don't surrender in 60 seconds. The chilling thing wasn't the threat itself. It was how calmly it was delivered. There was no anger, no hatred, just cold determination. The humans spoke about complete annihilation the way Veltharians might discuss the weather. They treat every engagement as total war, Velthan continued, his tentacles trembling as he accessed more recordings. Every battle is a fight for survival. They have no understanding of limited conflict or acceptable outcomes. Admiral Zextal listened to more intercepted transmissions, each one revealing another layer of humanity's terrifying approach to warfare. The humans didn't see battle as an art form or a test of skill. They saw it as a problem to be solved, as quickly and efficiently as possible, with no regard for tradition or proper procedure. Engineering Chief Dong Wuhan's voice came through clearly. Reactor output at 120%. I know it's dangerous, but we need every advantage we can get. Better to risk explosion than lose the fight. They were willing to push their own technology beyond safe limits, accepting the risk of destroying themselves rather than fighting at anything less than maximum capability. No Veltharian engineer would ever consider such reckless endangerment of his own ship. Lieutenant So Young Park's tactical analysis was even more disturbing. Enemy formation suggests they expect us to follow standard engagement protocols. Recommend we ignore all conventional tactics and focus on maximum damage. Per second, they're not ready for unrestricted warfare. The humans had studied their enemies and found them wanting, not because the Veltharians lacked skill or courage, but because they fought with honor while humanity fought for survival. War wasn't humanity's art, or their honor, or their game. It was their nightmare, something to be ended as quickly and decisively as possible so they could return to peace. That realization terrified the Veltharians more than any weapon could. The tactical display on Admiral Zexthul's bridge told a story that no Veltharian military commander had ever faced before. Of the 200 crystalline warships that had begun this engagement, fewer than 90 remained operational. The rest were either destroyed completely or drifting hulks in space, their crews dead or dying in the cold vacuum. In 3,000 years of galactic warfare, no fleet had ever suffered such catastrophic losses in a single engagement. Wars were supposed to be careful, measured affairs where battles might claim a dozen ships over several months. The humans had destroyed more than half his force in less than an hour. The vengeance hung in space before them, a testament to human stubbornness and engineering philosophy. The massive battleship looked like it should have been destroyed 10 times over. Huge sections of its hull were blackened and twisted from plasma impacts. Atmosphere leaked from dozens of breaches, creating glittering ice crystals in the void. Several of its weapon turrets were clearly offline, their barrels bent or completely missing, but it was still fighting, still moving, still killing. Admiral Zexthul had studied the technical specifications of every known warship design in the galaxy. He understood the careful balance between offense, defense, and structural integrity that made space combat possible. The human ship violated every principle of good design, and yet it remained functional despite damage that would have crippled any civilized vessel. "How are they still operational?" Scanner Prime Nexaval asked in bewilderment. "Their primary reactor should have failed, their hull should have buckled, their life support systems should be completely offline." The answer lay in humanity's approach to engineering. Where Veltharian ships were built like works of art, beautiful, efficient and delicate, human vessels were constructed like hammers, crude, ugly, and nearly impossible to break. Every system had backups, every backup had redundancies, and every component was designed to function even when damaged. Captain Jamin Kim's voice cut through the static of damaged communication arrays, his transmission reaching the Veltharian flagship despite the interference from the battle debris floating between them. His tone was surprisingly calm for someone whose ship looked like it had been through a meat grinder. "Veltharian fleet, this is Captain Kim of the Earth vessel Vengeance. You have fought bravely, but this engagement is over. Withdraw immediately from this system and return to your territory. Any future aggression against human colonies will be met with a full battle fleet." The offer was more generous than the Veltharians had any right to expect. By galactic law, the humans could have demanded reparations, territory, or complete surrender. Instead, they were simply asking the invaders to leave and not come back. Admiral Zexthal looked around his bridge at the faces of his surviving officers. These were beings who had dedicated their lives to the art of warfare, who understood every nuance of galactic military doctrine. They were staring at their instruments with expressions of complete confusion and growing fear. "Admiral," Communications Officer Kelvar said quietly, "what are your orders?" It was a question that no Veltharian commander had ever been forced to ask. In their elegant, civilized approach to warfare, there were always options: tactical retreats, negotiated ceasefires, appeals to higher authorities. But the humans had made it clear that there were only two choices: leave or die. Admiral Zexthal realized that his empire had encountered something completely unprecedented. This wasn't just a new species with better weapons or different tactics. Humanity had taken warfare itself and turned it into something else entirely, something brutal, efficient, and absolutely terrifying. They had weaponized warfare itself. The news traveled faster than light across the galactic communication networks, carried by merchant ships, diplomatic couriers, and military intelligence services. Within days, every civilized world in the galaxy had heard the impossible story. A single human warship had destroyed half of the mighty Veltharian fleet in less than an hour. At first, many species dismissed the reports as exaggeration or propaganda. The Veltharian Empire had been the dominant military power for 3 millennia. Their crystalline warships were considered the pinnacle of space combat technology. Surely no unknown species could have achieved such a devastating victory, but the evidence was undeniable. Sensor recordings from neutral observation posts confirmed the battle's outcome. Survivors from damaged Veltharian ships told the same terrifying story. The humans hadn't just won, they had redefined what victory meant. The Corvan colonies, which had been facing certain defeat just days earlier, suddenly found themselves at the center of galactic attention. Oppressed worlds throughout the galaxy began looking to them as symbols of hope. If these small human colonies could stand up to the Veltharian Empire and win, perhaps other species didn't have to accept domination quietly. Rebellion movements that had been dormant for centuries suddenly came to life. The Arcturus Mining Consortium found their workers refusing orders and demanding better treatment. The Rigel Trade Federation discovered that their tributary worlds were questioning the fairness of their agreements. Everywhere the message was the same: if the humans could fight back successfully, maybe others could too. Military academies across dozens of worlds went into emergency session, trying to understand what had happened at Corvan. Senior instructors, who had taught the same tactical principles for centuries, found themselves scrambling to develop new courses on human warfare doctrine and asymmetric combat theory. General Kenthara of the Andromedan Space Command stood before her staff officers, holding a datapad with preliminary analysis of the battle. "Everything we know about space combat has become obsolete overnight," she announced grimly. "These humans don't fight like any species we've encountered. They don't follow the rules because they don't acknowledge that the rules exist." The political implications were just as significant as the military ones. The careful balance of power that had maintained galactic stability for millennia was suddenly uncertain. If humans could defeat the Veltharians so decisively, what did that mean for existing treaties, trade agreements, and territorial boundaries? Colonel Hyejin Choi arrived at Nexus Prime 3 weeks after the battle, tasked with establishing humanity's first official diplomatic presence in galactic civilization. The neutral world had served as a meeting place for interspecies negotiations for over 1,000 years, but it had never hosted such a nervous gathering of ambassadors. The colonel was nothing like what the alien diplomats expected. She was polite, professional, and surprisingly reasonable. Her opening statement to the Galactic Council was delivered in perfect standard galactic, showing that humans had taken the time to learn proper diplomatic protocols. "The United Earth Colonial Authority seeks peaceful relations with all galactic civilizations," she began, her words causing visible relief among the assembled ambassadors. "We have no territorial ambitions beyond protecting our existing colonies and trade routes. We prefer negotiation to conflict, cooperation to competition." The relief was short-lived when she continued. "However, Our military capabilities ensure that we can maintain peace on our own terms. Any aggression against human interests will be met with an appropriate response. The message was crystal clear. Humanity wanted to be left alone, but they had the power to enforce that desire. 6 months after the Battle of Corvan, the galaxy had become a remarkably quieter place. 3 separate conflicts that had been brewing for decades simply evaporated when human patrol ships arrived in the disputed systems. The ships didn't fire a shot, didn't issue threats, didn't even communicate with the potential combatants. They just sat there silent and menacing, like sleeping predators that everyone knew could wake up at any moment. The Centauri-Rigel border dispute, which had been escalating toward full-scale war for 2 years, ended with both sides agreeing to peaceful arbitration the moment a human cruiser appeared on their sensors. The Korgath raiders who had terrorized merchant shipping in the Outer Rim suddenly found other places to hunt when human escorts began accompanying trade convoys. Even the ancient territorial conflict between the Andromedans and the Vegan Consortium was quietly shelved when both sides realized that their elegant war dances meant nothing in a universe where humans existed. Admiral Jamin Kim, promoted from captain after his decisive victory at Corvan, found himself in the unusual position of being the galaxy's most feared military commander and its most sought-after teacher. Species that had spent millennia perfecting their own approaches to warfare were now begging to learn human tactics. The Integration Center on Nexus Prime had become the most important military academy in the galaxy. Representatives from dozens of civilizations sat in classrooms that had been hastily converted from diplomatic meeting rooms, listening to human instructors explain concepts that challenged everything they thought they knew about conflict. The point of superior firepower, Admiral Kim explained to a room full of alien officers, his words being translated into 17 different languages simultaneously, is never having to use it. When your enemies know that fighting you means certain death, they stop being your enemies and start being your negotiating partners. The concept was revolutionary. For centuries, galactic civilizations had built their militaries to fight elegant, limited wars that could go on for decades. The idea of creating weapons so devastating that no one would dare face them in battle was completely alien to their thinking. Commander Velthan, the former Veltharian intelligence officer who had first analyzed human communications during the battle, raised one of his tentacles to ask a question. He had been one of Admiral Kim's most dedicated students, spending hours each day studying human military philosophy. "Admiral, how do you maintain morale among troops who may never see combat? Our warriors take pride in testing their skills in battle." Kim smiled, understanding the alien's confusion. "Your warriors take pride in fighting because you've made fighting into an art form. Our warriors take pride in protecting people. The best human soldier is one who ends a conflict before it starts, who keeps families safe without firing a shot. Victory isn't about proving your skill, it's about everyone going home alive." In the back of the classroom, former Admiral Zexthal, now a student rather than a teacher, nodded slowly as he began to understand the paradox that had initially baffled him. Humans had become the galaxy's most peaceful species precisely because they were its most terrifying warriors. No one wanted to fight them, so no one had to. The galaxy was learning to think like humans, and in doing so, it was discovering that true victory meant never having to fight at all.